This is Deborah Pardes on the Voices of Swell, and tonight I'm sparking a conversation with Stephen Fry. For those of you who'd like to learn more about Stephen in terms of who he is as an actor or author, activist, philanthropist, I'm going to paste his Wikipedia page here because it saves me a lot of angst about what to pull out from his life as a singular achievement because his life's too awesome. And it would be tough. So he's so accomplished, and I just wouldn't know what to choose. So Wikipedia, and it's actually a great page, so enjoy it. I'm here in Los Angeles, and Stephen is in London right now, and he's still asleep, and he's expecting to wake up to hear this swell. Good morning, Stephen. I hope you slept well. I hope my voice goes well with the tea that you might be drinking. And thanks so much for agreeing to spend time with me here on Swell. I thought a lot about why people really agree to these conversations in the first place and why we talk. And I decided to look at a quote from Stephen Hawking that we use a lot here at Swell. He was a great thinker about a lot of things, not just science. And he said, mankind's greatest achievements have come about by talking, and its greatest failures by not talking. And that's kind of true and kind of perfect, and it really brings meaning to the work I do and definitely to the work you do. So for our talk over the next few days, I want to offer you this setup. So imagine we're sitting and there's a table between us, and it's in a really great, vibey, good room. And the table has this beautiful flower arrangement on it, really exquisitely done, all kinds of different kinds of flowers in it. Some are exotic, some are more plain. Each one of them represents a word or a theme. And I'm going to hand you a flower as an offering, sort of as a prompt. And if you would, think about what comes up for you with that prompt. So I hope this kind of sounds like a good structure, and let's see where it takes us. Okay, here's the first flower. Its petals are kind of wilted, and its stem is definitely prickly. And it represents 2020. Please talk to me about 2020.
Deborah, thank you for your beautiful flower. Well, is it a beautiful flower? As you say, it's quite prickly and thorny. 2020. As soon as you said it, I immediately thought of 2020 vision. I even forgot that it was a year, which is rather absurd, isn't it? I suppose what it made me think about more than anything is this vexed question of a kind of political philosophy fissure, divide between society or in society that really is at the bottom of the culture wars and the political division and everything that makes us all cross and hot under the collar at the moment. And that is, I suppose, the difference between people who value freedom above all else, for whom freedom is the ultimate prize of a democracy or a civilization or a way of running life, and those for whom justice and equality and fairness and health and education are the most important things. And of course they flourish in free societies, but freedom is often constrained in order to impose taxation, to direct economies, to be more, as the French say, dirigiste, more directivist in the way you live, which in America is regarded as socialism, and in Europe is just regarded, I suppose, as social democracy. And I know in America freedom is probably the highest prize. It is that which America regards as sacred, if you like. Whereas in Europe, we don't think that so much. And that shocks Americans because naturally you regard freedom as the most important thing. And in quite a few areas of America, you can see that that's a red Republican idea. Freedom first, freedom to use guns, freedom to say what the hell you like, freedom not to be locked down in the case of a pandemic, freedom to question science and to live by your own rules and so on and so forth, and form militias if you like. So in a sense you can say that's a right-wing attribute, it's Randian and so on. And maybe the blue states, people are more willing to undergo lockdown and all the rest of it. But nonetheless, I think it does make us all question how much we value freedom over health, how much we are prepared to take on trust science, the church of science, as some people regard it, and governmental advice and advisories and so on, and how much we are free to decide not to. In other words, how much do we invest in society itself? Are we social animals like bees or pack animals or herd animals who live and thrive by their social interaction with their own species? Or are we lone creatures like cats who have their own individual territories? Well, we're obviously not pack animals exactly, but I suppose the word, because we are apes, is troops. We live in troops or groups. And those groups can fight each other, as we know, and they can solace and nurture themselves as a group. But something like lockdown, where so much isolation is taking place, is like an appalling laboratory experiment, isn't it? How will certain young people, certain vulnerable people, certain older people, people of all demographic characters, how will they survive isolation and loneliness? Will we be like those animals that are, sometimes put in cages and taken to the jungle to be released to the wild, and when the door is slid open, they just sit there quivering, saying, I'm not going out there. Maybe we start to become dependent. Anyway, listen, I'm getting into my towards the 5th minute here, and I'm not sure I've answered the question very intelligently. I've just sort of thrown myself at it. But lastly, let me thank you for this opportunity to have a chat like this. One thing that fascinates me is the difference between writing and speaking in real time. And what I like about Swell is that it's not in real time. So, and that's something else we can think about. But anyway, I hope I haven't bored you too much. Thanks for the question. And here's to 2021, which we all so looked forward to. And how's it doing? Well, it's a little duller than 2020, and that's definitely a good thing. But it's not that dull yet. Oh, here's to dullness. Okay, catch you later.
Here's to dullness. It reminds me of a woman who was in Steven Spielberg's Shoah, Schindler's List. And at the Academy Awards, she spoke to all of us, accepting the award on behalf of the movie. And she said, just know next time that you have a dull Tuesday evening at 5:00, know how lucky you are. And she was obviously referring to the terror of the Holocaust and the gift of boredom in a way, or just a banal Tuesday evening. When you were talking, I was thinking about this mask that I got. The first mask I ever bought was in a gas station, and one side of the mask was Mickey Mouse, and the other side of the mask was camouflage. And I'm going to put the picture here of this mask because I think it's a great metaphor for the dichotomy you speak of just, the different sides of all of us. It's an incredible time to reflect, and some of it's on sort of the political stage, the world stage, and some of it's inside our bones and our guts. And I think 2020 really was an incredible time to see how we reflected inside ourselves, how we lived inside our loneliness, our isolation, and how we also were obsessed with the world at the same time. Crazy. And I'm so happy we're in this new era, and I have a lot of hope. Okay, here's the next flower I'm going to hand you, and this one is very regal, and it seems very strong, and the colors are magnificent. And this flower is history, and I'd love for you to speak about what history means to you as an actor, as an activist, as a wonderful human being, the concept of history. And just by the way, even though swells are 5 minutes each, you are welcome to have multiple swells if your mind is riffing and you want to continue. Please.
History. Now there's an interesting subject. My goodness me. I suppose the first thing I'd say is because two of my heroes, my intellectual heroes, if I can be grandiose, were both paradoxicalists, G.K. Chesterton and Oscar Wilde. And so that part of me that's influenced by them wants to say what I love about history is that you can change history in the same way that you can't change the future, which of course is the opposite of what we naturally think. But there's a way that's true. We're constantly changing history. We're reinterpreting it. We're reevaluating it. We're recalibrating it. We're fitting it to align with our own views about what it is to be a human. And that's very strange because, of course, what it is to be a human hasn't changed since historical times. Historical times, I think, are defined by times that succeed the cognitive revolution that brings language. Prehistory, the only record we have of prehistory is through objects, through archaeology and pots and shards and tools and other, the odd cave painting, which is hardly insignificant, and other such things. That's prehistory. But the moment we were able to write down what was happening to us and what had happened to us by report, we created archives of material that we can look at and call history. So that was about 5,000 years ago. Very, very recent, of course. But there's no evidence whatsoever, and I don't think anybody believes that as human beings we've changed in that short time. We could go back in a time machine and mate with and have viable children from a human being of that time. We're not in any sense genetically different in our composition as far as anyone can tell. The DNA of humans from 5,000 years ago exists. We are the same. And yet almost everything in our apprehension of the world seems to be different. The way we look at everything, the most important and fundamental things, who we are, what our value is, what our expectations might be, what our dignity is, and how we value others. All these things have changed out of sight in my own lifetime, let alone in the 5,000 years of historical human life. And that's a strange thing to grapple with. We are the same, and yet we're different. We're the same physically, but culturally, which is such a heavy word, or a word that has to take such a lot of heavy burden, the word culture. We are acculturated in a way that is utterly different. And so the physical side of us, if you prick us, do we not bleed? If you tickle us, do we not laugh? If you slap us, we're in pain. Of course we are. You can do things to a human being. You can feel things, in terms of food and physical comfort. All that is the same. And yet treatment and self-regard, everything has utterly changed. And it's, I think, all the more important, given that change, to understand, or at least to make an effort to understand our history. But there again, it's divided, isn't it? There's what you might call male history, and I know how careful one has to be at sort of assigning gender stereotypes to all kinds of human activities. But I just going by experience, I know so many men who once they pass the age of about 20 or 30, and I count myself as one of these, become more interested in a certain kind of history than in almost any other form of, if you like, intellectual transmission of ideas. So novels go out the window for most men by the time they're 20 or 30, unless it's thrillers. But military history and the history of politics and so on seems to be such a popular subject. It's weird. Almost all the men I know stopped reading novels and then turned into history buffs, or at least what they think are history buffs, what I think history buffs are. It's, of course, to a professional historian, nonsense. But history, like every academic subject, is split into extraordinary areas, often called studies. So, gender studies and racial studies and these studies and that studies, media studies and so on, all of which are different ways of looking at history. And it's part of the fact that there is no central authoritative way of looking at anything anymore. A quick part two, just to say, to pinch the loaf, as they say, just to finish off that thought. We now have histories. There is no history. And I think that's right, and it speaks slightly, doesn't it, to the first thing we were discussing, the fragmentation of a social cohesive whole that we can regard as us sharing, but instead we seem to be living in a more atomistic age in which the individual is given a primacy. And because of that, perhaps, we have histories. How often we hear that phrase, like as in with the Oprah interview with Meghan and Harry, is her truth. Now, that's a really important personal pronoun, isn't it? The truth, her truth. It takes a lot of thinking about. I'm not trying to make a point against her or for her or anybody in particular. But the fact that we can now use phrases like my truth and her truth shows that we come from a very different place from that which was universally inhabited, really, at least by by the chattering classes, by the elites, as they'd now be called, to which we belong, naturally, it has to be said, those with college educations, those with a sort of historical sense. And history, a bit like science, for that reason now is suspect in as much as there is no history. There are only histories. And because I come from an age where there was once a history, part of me is just, in a very pathetic way, resistant to this idea, because I want to go back to that snug reassurance of a time when there was history. America had its history, perhaps, and Britain its, but that was the only way they'd be separated. They were pretty much the same, essentially. It was a question of progress. It was part of the fact that human history could be defined as the story of human progress, Western human progress, according to certain principles. And these are all apparently in the air. And if they're in the air, some people are angry that they're in the air and they want to put them all back in the box they were once in before, and they blame French intellectuals or American campuses for spreading this doubt. But this, again, if you know enough history, this is a recycling of something that happens all the time. John Donne, the new learning casts all in doubt, he said in the early 17th century. The new learning casts all in doubt. He was referring to the scholarship that was coming out of the Renaissance, that was overturning Aristotelian ecclesiasticism, and Neoplatonism was arriving, and a new way that was at the beginning of a humanism that would become the Age of Reason and then the Enlightenment. And the new learning always casts all in doubt. And we are living in a time of new learning, and we are reassessing so much culturally and personally, and to do with identities, and to do with value, and to do with what is inside history, to look at every building and to see that it is a register not just of an aesthetic taste or a movement in architecture, but that it carries with it the story of multiple discourses of empire and ownership and all kinds of things. You don't have to be left-wing about it. You can interpret it exactly that way in a right-wing way if you wanted to. But using wings is perhaps not the best way of doing it. But anyway, these are the things I think about when I think about history. And I'm always desperate to try and understand as much history in the old-fashioned sense of facts, because they are the essential material without which you can't really talk about history. But on the other hand, there's historicism, which is the nature of what we think history to be, historicity. And that's a different thing, as I say, which is really now, like so much in our life, being reassessed in ways that some people find dangerous, alarming, or stupid, or ignorant, or tyrannical, and other people find liberating and important. And presumably, as usually in human history, the answer lies somewhere in between. But it's worth remembering phrases like that, the new learning casts all in doubt, because this has happened so many times before. And I don't think, much as we may be proud of the extraordinary cataclysmic nature of our present, I was just going to say, I don't think there's anything we can do in our cataclysmic present that won't have a parallel in the past. That's how I'll leave it. But as I say, we can change history, but we can't change the future. All right.
Well, that was the perfect masterclass. Really, there's a few things I wanted to say in reflection to listening to you. One is, I feel like this is the age of cognitive dissonance, because you talk about there are immutable facts of history, but there's also this organicness of history, like you said, and I don't know if my brain can always hold those two things in the same space. And the other thing you said that is, you used a word smug, and I've always wanted to wear a t-shirt that had the word smug on it with a big red line through it, because I think smugness is probably one of the worst personal characteristics someone can have if they're smug. It just shuts down everything. So I'm sitting in my car, just had a beautiful hike, and I'm going to give you a flower. I'm going to give you a picture of a flower from my hike. And I think the next flower I want to offer you is well-being. And you have written so beautifully for many years about self-care and mental health and well-being. And I want to know first how you are and how you are now. And then I'd love you to speak about the journey you've had with exercising your ability to express such complex conversations, such complex issues in your style, and what areas of well-being still elude you, what's still complicated, and what's very clear. And just take us on the journey with you a little bit and let us sort of understand your perspective when it comes to self-care and well-being.
Hello there. Now, it's my turn to talk to you while you're asleep. I'm sorry that the timings are so weird. I suppose that's a good thing to start talking about when addressing the subject of wellness, or as I heard it, I kid you not, described not long ago, wealthfulness, which is somehow just deeply pathetic and very indicative of the way the fullness has been added, as in mindfulness, and I suppose wealthfulness is attempting to be a physical equivalent. Anyway, there's no need to mock it, I suppose. But that reminds me, sleep. The older you get, and also as time goes on, medicine seems to follow this too, sleep grows in importance and becomes a vast and almost limitless indicator of good health. It seems that without enough sleep, amyloid plaque forms, that is the beginning of dementia, of Alzheimer's, and without sleep all kinds of things happen to the immune system. And twinned with our reasonably recent obsession with sleep data, which is available through apps, we have the good old microbiome, the gut, which is a deeply fashionable area as well. How many prebiotics and probiotics and fermented foods, from kimchi to all kinds of fermented drinks and goodness knows what else, sauerkraut and kombucha and so on. Anyway, all this is faddish, of course, and we are faddish because they speak to an anxiety we have about our bodies, because we know full well that we have short-circuited nature's original plan for us, which is to reward us with pleasure when we ingest fats and sugars and proteins in a really abundant measure. It just gives us joy. It releases all those wonderful encephalins, all the endorphins and the noradrenaline and the serotonin and the melatonin and whatever else it is and we can get these now without any of the effort that it used to take us, because of farming and because of that's the original thing, of course, the agricultural revolution that first got us to plant, but then the herding of animals and of course later on, after the Industrial Revolution, and into the world of the stockyard and industrialized animal husbandry and agribusiness in terms of growing crops too. And we're aware that this has done enormous damage to the planet, and we're aware that it's done enormous damage, ironically, to our health in a way. We're no longer malnutrited, which used to be a big issue. It's It's rare in the West, at least, to find malnutrition, though we're deeply aware of cases of terrible hunger and famine, indeed, in the developing and undeveloped world, I suppose we call it. But also, as I say, it's this anxiety. We're now so anxious about our health. All this extra time we have because we don't forage, and our food comes in these enormous sort of 3-acre warehouses where the goods of all the continents of the earth are heaped together in a way that would have been unspeakable luxury to Charlemagne and Napoleon and Louis the XIV and Queen Victoria and any other great sort of leader or head of state at a time of abundance. And a figure of power, they would be astonished by the individual power we all have every time we enter a supermarket. It's staggering how much is available to us and how much trouble it causes us. It's our prayers have been answered, and as we know, those whom the gods wish to punish, they answer our prayers. So that's one side of it all, and that's taken me up to the full 5 minutes, I suppose, just really reiterating what we already know, and that is that we're in a state of constant anxiety about our health, and that essentially it's all a result of a kind of self-harm, I suppose you'd call it, the self-harm that is there with alcohol and drugs and tobacco and bad food and bad fizzy pop and drinks and all the things we have are slowly killing us, but very slowly. I mean, we mustn't overstate it. The mortality rates are so much lower than they used to be. So we'll go on to part 2 quickly, if we may. But thanks for the question. Mental health is something we're all thinking about a lot, especially during lockdown, as it seems that the pressures of seclusion and isolation are bearing down on people of all ages in terrible ways, in ways that we won't really be counting the cost of for some time, I suspect. I've had my terrible troubles with mental health. I've been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Originally, actually, it was cyclothymia, then bipolar 2, and then bipolar 1. I sort of went up the ladder as far as the DSM is concerned, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which doctors use to define certain kinds of health disorder of the mind. And we're more aware of these things now. I did a documentary in the early part of the century called The Secret Life of the Manic Depressive, manic depression being the old sort of title that we used to give bipolar disorder. And since that time, I'm not saying as a result of my documentary, although it did have quite an effect, and the conversation has opened up everywhere, from the royal family downwards or upwards, depending on your point of view. People are talking about mental health. And there are, of course, cynics who say, well, we just have a generation of infantilized people, the millennials and those after them, who mistake a little bit of upset for mental health. They're encouraged to believe that they've got a real disorder that is, in need of psychiatric attention or very serious attention, when actually all they're dealing with is sort of unhappiness or a bit of nervousness and anxiety. It's very, very hard to say, because all of us like to imagine that there is such a thing as human will which can overcome some elements or endure some elements of unhappiness. But we have to be aware that there is, of course, a real thing, which is mental illness, and it has what doctors call a high morbidity. It drags you down in health in other areas. It's very easy to turn to alcohol and drugs as a result of a mood disorder, because especially if it's undiagnosed, you don't know what's wrong with you. All you know is you want to quieten the noise, numb the mind, or to, if it is numb through depression, to lift it. And so stimulants like cocaine or whatever are very common in self-medication, and alcohol then to numb down the over-effective use of those. So, this is all well covered, and I suppose we're all well aware of it. But it is an interesting exercise to look around the world and to wonder if actually it is our society that is making people less well, or whether there are expectations of happiness that young people have, expectations of satisfaction and calm and reward and ease, which life was never supposed to satisfy, that life is actually tough. It's very tough. It causes pain. And learning is difficult, and understanding ideas is difficult, and that difficulty is something we have to be prepared for. Now, that sounds like a rather right-wing, rather sort of Randian way of looking at things, and I certainly wouldn't want to take it too far. On the other hand, I would say that I'd encourage anybody who feels unhappy or unwell in the mind to believe in themselves and to believe that they have inner strength. Not that they should, deny when they're unhappy, but that it is worth having faith in oneself, because that causes a reciprocity inside. That, having faith in yourself is not exactly a self-fulfilling prophecy, but it can help. But otherwise, what is ill health in any measure? It should be invisible and transparent. It's like, I'll do this for a part 3. Let's make up a condition. We'll call it blimpfulness. And blimpfulness is an extremely important state to be in. And I wonder if you are blimpful, and I wonder if I'm as blimpful as I should be. I think I am, but there's only 10 seconds to go on this, so I'm going to start a third one again. I'm hopeless at this. Here we go. So blimpfulness is a state of not being attacked by yellow and purple demons who fly out of windows and eat your ears. Now, I suspect you're in a state of blimpfulness. You haven't had any yellow and purple demons flying out of windows and eating your ears, but you're unaware of being blimpful because it never occurred to you that such creatures could exist and that they would attack your ears. And it may be there's a planet where there is no illness, and therefore they have no concept of wellness, just as we have no concept of blimpfulness. And I suppose that's really all I'm saying, and it's so obvious it gives you a nosebleed, and that is that we shouldn't be aware of our wellness, and we usually aren't. It's only when we're ill, we've got a bout of flu, or let's hope not COVID, or whatever it might be, or we've broken a leg, and we think, why wasn't I so grateful yesterday when I was well? Why didn't I skip along the street saying, thank you, nature, thank you, cosmos, for granting me this fabulous state in which this doesn't hurt, that doesn't hurt, this is fine, the teeth are okay, the digestion seems to be working, everything's fine. But of course we don't. We get on with it. And that is sort of what the cosmos demands of us, that we enjoy, without being conscious, our good health. And the rest, I think, is anxiety. I get, and I'm as anxious as anyone else. I have fads of taking ridiculous supplements, which I know are hopeless and pointless. But, yeah, I think wellfulness is a word that I shall never forget. But in the meantime, I'm happy to say that I am pretty well, both in the mind and the body, in as much as I've got nothing to complain about and nothing to be aware of. I'm in a blissful state of blimpfulness.
I'm still laughing because I love the word, and I have to say, I've had my states of unhealthiness, whether it's a broken limb or having a bad cold or something. But I'm very blimpful right now, and I find it a difficult word to say, blimpful. It kind of gets caught in my teeth. But thank you for that. It's interesting. The rigor of health is like an addiction to a lot of people. And I just hope in the end of the day that it's all been worth it. That's all. I think I've lived a pretty clean life, and I in my 50s now, I'm like, wow, I'm getting a bit of a reward for it. So I'm feeling pretty good, and I'm happy you're feeling well. I know you had you had a bout of cancer for a minute there. I mean, come on, let's just have a blimpful life from now on. Let's have that. The flower in this exotic
exquisite flower arrangement between us now has been dying for me to pick it. And here I am. I'm picking it, and it is it's exotic colors. It's got a little bit of blemish though on the bottom of it because it's been around for a while, but it's still so vibrant. And this flower represents your friendship with Hugh Laurie. I'm fascinated by long-term friendships, especially ones that are associated with working together and creating together. They're so beautiful. And I wanted you to talk to us, with us, about Hugh Laurie, and then maybe spin off from that to talking about friendship. Love is a different topic, I think, although maybe not. Maybe this is a flower that's so complex and beautiful that it holds the topic of Hugh Laurie, friendship, and of course, love. I'm such a fan of connection and love. And it's the only true oxygen that fills my lungs and my soul. And when I think about the relationship you have with Hugh, it really just fills me up so much. I'm a big fan of Fry and Laurie. I'm an unusual American in that I've some of my most favorite ever shows are things like Absolutely Fabulous, affectionately called AbFab, and The Vicar of Dibley, and Keeping Up Appearances. And, of course, Fry and Laurie. And I'm just a bit younger than you. And I didn't grow up with Fry and Laurie the way I should have in my 20s when you guys were doing this. And you're both so beautiful on screen. Isn't youth beautiful when you look at it? You're like, oh, I was so beautiful. Anyway, I'm going to link one of my favorite best of reels on YouTube so people can watch you guys in your best form. But here we go. Here's a bit from you on love and friendship and Hugh Laurie.
Hilariously, that link to the BBC.com is banned in Britain. That's to say, you can't use it. You have to use bbc.co.uk. It's all very complicated and silly, but just another example of how strange intellectual copyright is and how valuable to some, and how extraordinarily tight the controls over it are, and become more so, it seems. Anyway, now there's a kind of unwritten rule that we don't talk about other people in the public eye who are not part of that particular interview situation or profile or whatever it is we're doing. So it's not that I'm not going to mention Hugh because he's my best friend, but it's not for me to describe his character or talk about him in ways that are sort of rude when someone isn't in the room. I hope that doesn't sound too English and peculiar, but that is, as I say, a sort of ethos that is generally held amongst those who are fortunate or unfortunate enough to be in the public eye. But I will say what I can say that I've written before and said before, and Hugh has agreed with me, or indeed shared that wonderful embarrassment of two people remembering the same situation quite differently. But this is how I remember meeting him. My first 2 years at Cambridge University were mostly spent with me throwing myself into the drama. One of the huge advantages of the universities like Cambridge is that they don't teach drama, so there are no drama teachers. It's not a course. You don't get points for it. It's entirely extracurricular. You do it because you love it. And it also means you don't get interfered with by grown-ups casting you, people in scarves who sort of constantly look as if they're cold, saying, I wonder if it'd be a good idea if maybe, and oh, bugger off, let us get on with it, That's the beauty of being a student, is control, your absolute control of your own life. And in Cambridge in particular, and in Oxford too, the old universities, the ancient universities, as they like to style themselves, there's none of this fuss about the work you have to do. You just turn up to the exams at the end of your 3 years and hope you've done okay, really, especially in the arts, in the humanities. Not quite so true in vocational subjects like law and so on, but where you do have to know things, in medicine, of course, and architecture and sciences. But in case of English literature, which I read, there was absolutely nothing. You just occasionally read a book and made up an essay to read to your tutor, the fellow of the college, and so on. Anyway, I won't go into too much detail, except to say I did a lot of acting. And a girl I immediately responded to, with whom I became very good friends, was simply the most talented actress I'd ever seen in my life, either amongst professionals or amateurs. She seemed to have been born fully armed, like Pallas Athene. And her name was Emma Thompson, of whom you may have heard, of course. And so I saw her in plays, and she encouraged me to audition in my first term, or second term, I think. And I did, and I got into a play, and I suddenly was just doing nothing. I was rushing from rehearsals to rehearsals. I was doing like 3 or 4, 5 plays a week. Lunchtime, late night, main house, extra afternoons, mornings. It was extraordinary. I certainly wasn't doing any academic work. But God, I was enjoying it. And then I wrote a play, which was a comedy, and in the end of my second year took that to Edinburgh, where very happily it won an award. But more importantly, Emma came to see it, and she brought this fellow along, a sort of tall fellow with big blue eyes, who said, hello, and I said hello, and his name was Hugh Laurie. And we were about to begin our third year. We don't have words like semester, sophomores and senior graduate things. You have splendid names for it. We just called it a third year. Hugh was going to be president of this old club, this 150-year-old club called the Footlights, which specialised in comedy. Again, not curricular. This was just an amateur club, like a cigar club or a wine club or something. It was a comedy club. But it had been going for a very long time, and it had produced John Cleese and Jonathan Miller and Peter Cook and all this extraordinary list of brilliant people. Douglas Adams. Goodness knows how many. So Hugh was, as I say, inheriting the presidency. He could also have been president of the University Boat Club because he was a brilliant oarsman. He claims he tossed a coin at the end of the second year. If it was heads, he'd accept the Footlights, and if it was tails, he'd accept the Boat Club. Anyway, he needed someone to write with, and Hugh, we were there. Yes, Hugh needed someone to write. Anyway, beginning of the third year, Emma comes round to my rooms at Queen's College in Cambridge and says, I'm going to take you off to see Hugh, whom I introduced you to in Edinburgh in the summer, because he needs someone to help with him writing sketches and songs and things for a review, for a show. So I went over with Emma. I remember getting to his college, Selwyn, and I remember she knocked on the door, and there was a cry of come in, and he was sitting on the bed with a guitar, and his girlfriend Katie was making a coffee, I think, and he went, hello, again, and I said, hello, and he said, I've just been writing this song, and he played the first verse of a song he'd been writing, and I sat down on the bed and suggested lyrics for a second verse, and we never stopped writing from that moment onwards. It was, as I've said, it was like love at first sight, but in a bromance comedy way, obviously. And it was just extraordinary. To me, I felt as if a Hugh-shaped hole that I didn't know existed, had suddenly been filled, and I was now complete. A friend is your other self. Is that Horace or Ovid? One of them. I think Ovid, actually. The masterpiece of nature, a friend, is your great Ralph Waldo Emerson said. And I do believe that. I think friendship is an extraordinary thing. I think, as we're in touch during this lockdown and managed to see each other following strict rules, didn't see him and his family and his children, whom I adore and have watched grow up from babies. There's a depth and a richness and an ability, all the cliches. You can leave a friendship alone and it's still in terrific health when you come back to it, unlike a romance which needs constant gardening. It is a marvellous gift, and I feel sorry for people who don't have a friendship like that. It's particularly wonderful, of course, when it involves comedy and collaboration and writing together and fitting into each other in different styles. Hugh is a brilliant physical comedian, superb natural athlete, of course, so he can tumble and roll. He has the funniest, most mobile face. But one shouldn't overlook his extraordinary wisdom and verbal gifts and knowledge and just sheer brain power. He's a truly marvellous man. I adore him. He is, as Dr. Watson said when he thought Holmes was dead, the best and wisest man I've ever known, friend I've ever had. That's a nice thing to be able to say. It really is. And of course, love and marriage is more important and more extraordinary, and deeper. It touches all kinds of areas that naturally friendship. The beauty of friendship is it doesn't touch all those areas. Sometimes, it's like just having a cat on your lap. You don't need a whole conversation and a whole. I don't know how can I put this. Sometimes just the quietness and ease of friendship, the fact that you can't really row that much with a friend because you just mock each other out of it. You just go shush, Whereas with a romance, with a deep kind of erotic and lyrical relationship, things are more, there's so much more at stake, there's so much more intensity, there's so much more narcissism. Friendship doesn't allow for narcissism. I think that's one of the things I love about it. Narcissists can't make friends, they can have lovers, and that's often difficult, of course. But I really do think it's, friendship's the one. Sorry, I'm going to get all sentimental. Okay, I'll sign off here.
Sentimental is a good place to be. I was just thinking as I was listening to you how special this interview is and has been, and I feel so grateful that we've had almost an hour of dialogue back and forth, and I have this one flower I'd like to pick from this metaphorical arrangement between us, which has to do with sort of the gift of giving and what you've given us, but in the more broad terms, the gift of charitable living, the gift of philanthropy, not always in dollars, but in kind. And I'd love for you to speak about the need for kindness and the need for giving and the act of receiving as well, because I think it's a big cycle. So I'm not going to use the word charity here. I'm going to use the broad stroke of just the giving of each other to each other and the identifying of values that drive these behaviors. And in your life, what has moved you and what has caused you to sort of give of yourself in time and talent. And perhaps this is a beautiful place for people to kind of internalize this whole conversation and take all the gifts from it. But I would love for you to speak about the expansiveness of what giving is in one's life. I think that would be really beautiful to hear you speak about that.
Oh my, giving, that's an interesting one. Well, I'll tell you a little about my history with it. When I was a teenager, I was obsessed with Oscar Wilde, as many teenagers are, and rightly so, and it would be a shame to lose that. He is, after all, the Prince of Bohemia and of students everywhere, and his way of looking at the world is a valuable one. And I was particularly astonished when I first managed to feel grown up enough to tackle his essay, The Soul of Man Under Socialism, which is a remarkable political essay, quite brilliant. It addresses issues like poverty and social justice, as we would now call it, but in that terrific, sort of paradoxical way that isn't gamesome. It's not that he doesn't take poverty seriously. He thinks of it from the point of view of the poor rather than from the point of view of the rich who shake their head slowly and try and do something about it. And I remember being very struck by a phrase of his that the enemy of the slave is the kind slave master. I thought, my goodness. Now, he doesn't just say that and say that's a fact, leave it there, can't question it. But he lays it up. It's a rationalist point of view, almost Hegelian, I suppose, in that Slavery will continue so long as people are saying, well, there are very kind slave masters. They look after them well. The slaves are happy. Look how good they are. Whereas the more cruel and abominable the practice of slavery is seen to be because of cruel slave masters, the more quickly it ends. And of course, I say this is a kind of Hegelian logic or rationalism, because of course it underlies a lot of what was socialism to Wilde and became, of course, more generally known as Marxism. And I remember at university, my very left-wing friends, I was always a bit left-wing myself, but they were, the really hard left, said the same about charity, about giving. They said, as long as people say, oh, well, look, there are charitable organizations, there are these non-profits, there are people that are looked after, then the very structure of injustice that underlies our society would not be challenged, because it is a sticking plaster, as they called it, a Band-Aid, you could say in America, I guess. And that was quite ironic that Band-Aid was the name of the charitable push in the 80s to do things about the poverty in Ethiopia, wasn't it? So that's a rational point of view, and it's very convincing. But which of us can walk by on the other side when there is suffering? When there is suffering now, we want to relieve it. We want to help. It's feeble, it's pathetic, it's never enough. Is it to salve one's own conscience? Is it really to do good? All these questions naturally arise. And I think the point about the cruel and the kind slave master is a very valid one. However, it is a liberal position, which is why liberals are so despised, and I count myself as one, and I know we are despised by the left and the right, and always have been. Stalin and Hitler were united in their loathing of liberal intelligentsia and their books and their questions and their uncertainty and their constant drive to be sort of honest and truthful. And it's called virtue signalling these days, isn't it? Or it's bleeding hearts and taking the high moral ground. It's a very difficult thing, because what the world needs more than anything else, I suspect, is a period in which we don't doubt people's motives. We can doubt their actions, we can doubt the result of what they do, but this constant making enemies of people on the basis of their souls, they think wrongly, they're wicked, they do it to show off if they're left-wing, and they do it to crush if they're right-wing, and purely for profit. We have to start trusting each other. And I suppose what one should look at is that old phrase, charity begins at home, and I'll do that in the next 5-minute section. But it's such a complex business and very difficult to sort out. And I don't know what the answer is, but let's have a try in our next 5 minutes. The most capitalist country in the world, I suppose, is the United States, though you might argue, ironically, that China now is. And America has the most prodigious and extraordinary culture of philanthropy and giving. Every theatre you go to, virtually every opera house, every art gallery has walls and walls of lists of names of this family foundation and this trust and so on. And it is a kind of hammered into Americans that the price of success is that you share it. And the famous Andrew Carnegie quotation about the man who dies with money loses, that it's a failure to die rich, that you must give it away. And yet, on his way to doing that, Andrew Carnegie allowed his union-busting brutes to beat up steel workers while he conveniently went back to Scotland, so he wasn't blamed for it. And there's a dark side to his industrialism, as there is to many. This drive to make the profit, and you see it in a slightly less bloody way in Silicon Valley and in other high-pressure and hugely successful corporate scenes, that people are driven very, very hard. Profit motive is huge. And then the billionaires who are chugged out at the other end, a few of them, gracefully donate things to the world. It's a strange way of doing it. And we look at social democracies in Europe, and I'm not saying they're better. Heck, I live in America. I love America. I don't want anyone to think for a second that what I'm saying is anti-American. It's far from it. But if we look at Sweden and the countries that are mostly the happiest countries in the world, they just announced recently, didn't they? It's Finland, Sweden, Norway again, Switzerland. These countries... they don't have such a culture of philanthropy. The idea is that you all join in. It's an economy of scale, and tax. Tax is the price you pay for civilization. And somehow we need to change the language so that people see tax as their philanthropy or their duty, their joy, to contribute, so that there is street lighting, so that the roads are good, so that the police force and the health and the education of the nation is taken well. It's not to say that you diminish freedom and capitalism and so on. I think almost all the most successful economies in the world are mixed economies, where the state does a certain amount of intervention and nudging, and entrepreneurs are free to entrepren, as it were. And in terms of charity, yes, I don't know the answer. It's very difficult. What I would say is, and this is a different attitude, if you're going to give to charity, look up Pete Singer, the Australian philosopher and bioethicist and animal liberationist as well, amongst many other things. A hugely influential figure. And he has a site that he's set up, which is about effective giving, where you audit the charities that you give to in terms of their effectiveness. You see how much they actually do. And it seems a very good idea. It has its downsides, possibly. I know there are those who say, well, it puts pressure on charities to deliver in almost like capitalist organizations, but so they can prove how good they are. But it comes down to us all, I suppose, trusting that together we are better than singly. And that is my final message, is that I am a believer in humanity as members of a social, cohesive force, that we belong with each other, to each other, and we're stronger when we're not individual, when we're not atomistic. And that includes the way we look after those who are poor and those who are suffering, because we know about them now as we never used to. Even if they're 10,000 miles away, we know about it. They are our brothers and sisters. Anyway, I'm not sure I've said anything particularly useful, but I hope it's something to think about. This has been such a pleasure. And thank you all who have for listening. Farewell. Bye-bye.
You have given us so much to think about. Thank you so much for this last set of swells and for your presence here and for this conversation. It was so wonderful for me to just be able to prompt you with topics and hear your thoughts. Here's to 2021 being just a wonderful, connected year for all of us. I look forward to hearing your voice more on your own personal Swellcast, and just be well, safe travels, and look forward to seeing you and hearing you and enjoying all the work you do in our world. Take good care.
I am sorry, Miss Deborah, but you are definitely Miss Judith Holden Reed. I would know that voice anywhere. I don't know why you said your name was Deborah, but I'm pretty, I would bet money on you being Judith Holden Reed.